The Day of Atonement, feast or fast day. The Day of Atonement is one of the holy convocations laid out in Leviticus chapter 23. It takes place on the 10th day of the 7th month. This was the one time of each year where the high priest was allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies and do the atonement sacrifice, where the blood was sprinkled on the mercy seat, thus removing sin from all of Israel for the entire year. This exact sacrifice is continued in the heavenly tabernacle by our high priest, Yeshua the Messiah. All of the feast days found in Leviticus 23 are called Sabbaths multiple times. One Sabbath is the same as another. They have all the same instructions. Don't work. Don't cause others to work. Don't do any activities that are in preparation for work. And rest. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbi instituted a fast in mourning on the Day of Atonement. A fast that is still held to this day, even though the word fast is never found in conjunction with the Day of Atonement. Although some people do say it is there if you dig deep enough. So let's dig. First off, let's establish that the Day of Atonement is in fact a Sabbath day. It is called so twice in the scripture. The Hebrew word for the seventh day is Shabbath. Strong's number H7673. This is the same word that is used in Leviticus 23 when describing the seventh day Sabbath and all of the other Sabbath days. We must acknowledge that there is only one type of Sabbath. All Sabbaths are equal in the eyes of the Father. The same word is used to describe all of the appointed times in Leviticus 23. Sabbath means Sabbath. The main instruction for the Day of Atonement is that we must afflict our souls. What does that word mean? Affliction can mean abstaining from the intake of food. But that is not the exclusive interpretation of that word. The word afflict is used in Leviticus 16, 23, and Numbers 29. The same Hebrew word is used in all three occurrences. Ana. Strong's number H6031. Afflict, looking down, browbeating, depress, literally or figuratively. Abase, self-abasement. Chasten self, deal hardly with, humble, submit, weaken. Afflict is in no way associated with food. It is not mentioned in relation with or next to in the dictionary. Therefore, afflict does not equal fast. Therefore, we must look to the second word, soul. This is the Hebrew word nephesh. Strong's number H5314. Soul is a properly breathing creature that is animal, body, beast, or appetite. Ooh, now we're getting to the good stuff. Also breath, pleasure, selves, ghost, person, or self. Well, there you have it. If we're going to pick our own definitions, it tells us to afflict our appetites. Therefore, we fast. However, the Webster's Dictionary was written a long time ago. Perhaps the words don't mean what we think they mean today. Today, the word appetite is almost exclusively in relation to food or hunger. So let's look up appetite in the 1830s dictionary. A strong desire for either mental or physical gain, such as an appetite for knowledge or money. Food was included, but only as a secondary meaning for the word, not the primary. To sum up where we are so far, the instructions for Sabbath are the same no matter which Sabbath you're keeping. We are told to afflict our souls, humble our physical bodies. Neither of those words had any connection with fasting. Where does the fast come from in history? Most people start in Acts 27:9, where Paul mentions a fast, and in the Strong Concordance it says this is the Day of Atonement. In the Greek, the word nestia is used, which means an abstinence or a voluntary lack of food. The specific words, the Day of Atonement, are never used in this context. We don't know which fast he was doing or why. Zechariah 8:20 may answer this question. It references fasts that were kept in the 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th months. Here we find the Hebrew word for fasting, which is Tzom H6684, fast or fasting. However, these four fasts were never commanded anywhere in Torah. These were man-made fasts, not in reference to the appointed times. In fact, we have evidence of that in the rabbinical writings. These were instituted by man, not the Father. Let's look at what instructions we do have for the Day of Atonement to see, were they allowed to eat on that day? Leviticus 23:32 tells us that we must afflict our souls. Leviticus 16 is an in-depth description of what the priests did on that day. 16:27 tells us that the atonement sacrifices that had their blood sprinkled on the mercy seat were taken in their entirety outside the town and burned. They were not consumed. However, other offerings were given on that day. Numbers chapter 29, verses 6 through 9 give detailed instructions on what other offerings were given on the Day of Atonement. We find that grain offerings were given on this day. If we look at grain offerings in the beginning of Leviticus, we will see grain offerings were eaten by the priests and their families. Therefore, we know that many offerings were given on this day, and while some of them were burned in their entirety, others were consumed by the priests and their families on this day. This is very strong evidence that fasting was not a requirement on the Day of Atonement. If you're still questioning whether or not fasting is a requirement on this day, let's turn to the book of Jubilees. Chapter 50, verses 12 and 13. Or whoever fasts or makes war on the Sabbaths, the man who does any of these things on the Sabbath shall die. So the children of Israel shall observe the Sabbath according to the commandments regarding the Sabbath of the land, as it is written in the tablets that were given to Moses. As we see, fasting is prohibited on any of the Sabbaths. And here is one more piece of evidence from the scriptures. Judith, chapter 8, verse 6. She was a righteous woman who did fast all of the days of her life, except on the eve of the Sabbath and the Sabbath, the eve of the new moon and the new moon, and during the appointed feasts of Israel. Scripture says that Judith was a righteous woman in ancient Israel, and she did not fast on the appointed times or the feast days. There are no exceptions anywhere in Scripture. We are not to fast during the Sabbaths. Man's doctrine tells us that fasting is required, but that is not found anywhere in the Scriptures and instructions of the Father. I encourage you to test these things and find what is the good and perfect will of the Father. Have a blessed Day of Atonement. May the Father turn his face towards you and give you peace. Shalom.